You can be seated. Well, good morning. Very happy to be here today, and I'd like to first acknowledge, thank you, Stephen, for the tobacco, for the invitation of being here. I also would like to thank everyone who's welcomed me here today and took care of me. This has been great. And Andrew, and Miigwech for our smudging this morning. Before I begin, I'm going to say, usually when I speak in public, I'm not that nervous, but with a few VIPs in the crowd today, Andrew and Esther Wesley, I'm a little bit terrified. I say good morning, and the two comments that came out to me are, you going to raise the roof? And are you going to make us more holy? We're setting the bar low today, I can see. Thank you. But I very appreciate Esther and Andrew as well, because I've had many years of working with them in different capacities. And I think the last time I've actually in here, Andrew, is when you were ordained. So that's actually when I attended that, it was here. And so that was quite a few years ago. My name is Jonathan. My Mohawk name is Dagahomozere, which means turning canoe. Many years ago, I never used to say that, but it was another elder, Eileen Antone, who said, you've got a Mohawk name, you need to say it. Now, there is a whole story behind it, which if I say it, then it goes home my whole message today. But it took years to me to understand actually what it meant. And it was something that I do appreciate, that I am learning about more and more what that name means. It was my grandfather's name when he was my godfather. And but it was a large, big story involving the Mohawks many years ago. But just to get a sense, though, that is part of who I am as well. I grew up in Kahnawake, but I've been in Toronto since the early 90s. My background, just to give you a sense, I was raised Catholic in Kahnawake. So in many ways, the movement of circling and moving around hasn't been lost on me, although we do add the kneel part, so a little bit more of an aerobics class in the Catholic Church. But at the same time, the movement, it reminded me of that. I am a professor at Emmanuel College. I was also a student there, but I've been involved with the Indigenous community since the late 90s. I moved here in 93 from Kahnawake. But I'm very honored to be here with all of you today. I also do want to acknowledge, I did see in the last moment, Sandra Sego. What I'm going to speak to you about today is this idea of what's feeding you. And I'm going to be referring to all the readings that were brought forward. But before we do that, I'm going to start off with a little bit of something, how to introduce this topic. I'm a big fan of movies, particularly fantasy movies, sci-fi movies. I also read the books too, but one of them is Lord of the Rings. And what I'm going to be referring to is actually from the movie itself, not from the books, because there's a line in there which I do not think Tolkien wrote. I'll just say that, but you'll see what I mean. And in this particular scene, it is when two of the hobbits are captured, and they are mistaken that they have the ring. They do not. And it's the orcs and Uruk-hai that are there. And in the middle of the night, as they're waiting, they're starting to get antsy and argue among each other. And this is reason why, it's what they've been eating. And in this one line, and I'm going to quote, I'm not going to do my voice of the accent, but it says, we had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days. And then they start arguing as, why can't we have meat? And they look at the hobbits and say, why can't we eat them? They're meat. But of course, their orders were they're not supposed to harm them, not supposed to damage them. Even one of the orcs says, well, what about just a leg? We can share a leg. But of course, it gets to a point that it's now boiling, and one of the orcs tried to sneak up to kill one of them, and for all that effort, gets himself killed by the others. However, this is where I don't think Tolkien wrote here. Looks like meat's on the menu, back on the menu, boys. I don't think that was written in there. And there's a whole argument of whether or not orcs had restaurants that have menus, but that's a different story. But it was this aspect, this story that always reminded me of a scripture reading. And I'm going to go to Numbers 11. The rabble among them began to crave other food. Again, the Israelites started wailing and said, "If we only had meat to eat." We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost, and also the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and garlic. But now we've lost our appetite, and we never see anything but this manna. To quote Tolkien, we ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days. It goes on to say, the Lord says, "Go tell the people, consecrate yourself in preparation for tomorrow, when you will eat meat. The Lord heard you when you wailed, 'If we only had meat to eat, we'd be better off in Egypt.' Now the Lord will give you meat, and you will eat it. And you will not just eat it for 1 day, or 2 days, or 5, 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month, until nothing comes out of your nostrils and you loathe it because you've rejected the Lord." Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. Now, how does this relate to the readings? Because honestly, when I read the readings ahead of time, that story came to my mind. We look at Isaiah 40, and it says, "Lift up your eyes on high and see who created this." The First Nations version does talk about, if anything could be seen as good and honorable, think deeply about these things. And finally, in John 1, all things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. How is that all related? Well, that whole idea is that God created everything. And if God created it, it must be good. And if it's good, it must be good for us. Because it was maybe something that we needed, that God knew would be provided. However, we tend to forget this. We tend to forget that lesson that God made things for us to be able to not just enjoy, but these are gifts. And sometimes we take these gifts for granted. At Emmanuel College, which is actually just literally down the road, we are in the midst of developing an Indigenous garden. It is going to be coinciding with the 100th anniversary of the United Church. And so it's going to be a medicine garden, it's going to be a healing garden. And the space itself right now is actually, it's a lot of grass and a few trees. Andrew's actually one of our advisors on that committee right now. And as we're thinking about it, and as I was in there, what I realized about that space over time is that as a professor and with students, and people are always busy, we zing back and forth from that space, not paying attention to what's there. I don't pay attention to the trees or the flowers or the grass or anything else at times. Until one afternoon, as I was looking around, and I was kind of in the middle, and I saw nobody. It was probably late in the day. And I could hear the wind going through the trees, and it made me stop for a moment. Then I start to look around, and there's these sounds of the birds, and these smells from the flowers. And I realized, although I was alone, I wasn't alone. There was other life around me that I stopped paying attention to. Because normally in our life, we go from building to building. We move from one place to another to teach classes, to go to meetings, to do something. That we do not appreciate what's been given to us. When we think about these aspects of this morning, like the land acknowledgement is that that opportunity that we get to settle ourselves down, to reflect upon the land, the stories of this place, to understand the stories of the peoples, but all life that the land helped sustain. We sometimes forget that. We don't think of it as a relationships at times. We think about it as a place. But it just doesn't sustain us. It sustains all life. It is a gift. It gives us our food. It gives us our clothing. It gives us our medicines. It gives us the things that we need. And how did it get there? It was created. It was created in that way. It is part of creation. Creation is ongoing. Sometimes, though, what happens is that we forget that piece. We forget that piece as we are part of creation as well. We sometimes remove ourselves out of creation and think we lord over it. That is ours to exploit. That is not a relationship. The Dish with One Spoon in the land acknowledgement really clearly talks about the responsibility to care and share. Two important words. It's not to how do we live with each other as people who are very diverse, but is our understanding that we co-live in this place, that we have a responsibility and that we are not to take that for granted. In Philippians 4, one of the verses says, "Keep on doing the things you have learned and received and seen in me." In the First Nations version, "Keep walking in traditions I have passed on to you." That is our responsibility. We've been given these gifts and instructions on how to care for them. But we've sometimes rejected that idea. And we sometimes think we are better than that. We can do more. We forget that at times we actually should be relating with God, and instead we try to become God. We try to change things to fulfill not just our needs, but our wants and desires. We strive for more, and sometimes in that striving for more, we cause destruction, which is an impossible task. Why? Isaiah 40. His understanding is unsearchable. In Philippians, and in the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding. We think we know God, we don't. We forget our path, we forget the lessons that we've been taught. We stray. Many years ago, I've learned this lesson in so many different ways. When I was director at First Nations House, just as student services for many years, I had the honor of working with people like Andrew, like Lee Miracle, like Lynn McGregor's elders. And they weren't just there to impart wisdom. They were there to remind me of my role within the community. That I didn't think I was the director and therefore what I said happened. It was a reminder constantly. Well, guess what God did? God sent us a reminder in Jesus. God sent us a reminder that we lose our way, that we need to be refocused in on those teachings, and that we need to be honoring what we've been given. But in our arrogance, we destroy the land, we contribute to the extinction of species, we pollute the waters, the air, all in the name of progress. And progress isn't just us understanding more, it's wanting to be more, something beyond. In the Gospel of John, God sent John to testify that the true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming to the world. We were hearing these stories. There was messages. Jesus is coming. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, giving light to all humans. Jesus is that light. Jesus is that way, that reminder. It is that light and that life. Without those teachings, without us understanding that relationship, we go back into darkness. In our darkness, we lose our way. We fall off the path again. We hurt each other. We hurt ourselves. We hurt our relationship with God and all creation. Going back to the manna, going back to the bread that was given to the Israelites because God said, this is what you need. In John 6, verses 33 to 35. For the bread of God is the bread that came down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, always give us this bread. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. When we act upon our desires and our wants, we push aside that manna, we push aside that bread, and in doing so, we push aside that light and that life. And these passages are a reminder for us of why Jesus was sent. So we would be reminded of all that we have. And that way we can be in unison, in harmony with God, as opposed to always trying to become God. Now we'll go. Thank you.